Thank you, Mayor, for those words, and good morning, everyone. My name is Adam Leto. I'm the CEO of the Western Sydney Leadership Dialogue. It's great to be in Campbelltown. I do want to thank the Mayor and his GM, Lindy Dietz, and as well as the local member for Campbelltown, Greg Warren, for their continued persistence in pushing the dialogue to pay more attention to the challenges and the opportunities that are facing communities in the southwest. Their advocacy is a big part of why we're here today, so thank you. I would like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands in which we meet, the Darawal, and pay my respects to Indigenous elders past, present and emerging. I'd also like to acknowledge some of the dignitaries that are with us today, including Minister for Planning and Public Spaces, Paul Scully, the Member for Campbelltown, Greg Warren, Mayor of Campbelltown, George Grace, the Mayor of Wollondilly, Matt Gould, and former New South Wales Labor leader, Luke Foley. So today's forum builds off last year's Housing Summit, Up and Out, conceived to bring together a range of stakeholders and voices to better understand and to use the government's words, confront the housing crisis that has gripped the state and the nation. Over the past 12 months, the majority of the discussion has centred mostly on new planning reforms that have been introduced as a way to speed up planning processes and unlock new opportunities, particularly along our transport corridors. And it's mostly focused on the central and northern parts of Sydney. Today we want to have a look at the role that the southwest will play when it comes to shaping the future growth of Sydney. It's a role that perhaps has been a bit overshadowed by a little thing called the Western Sydney International Airport and the surrounding aerotropolis, but as I'm sure we'll hear today, it's not the only project that's influencing development in the region. Firstly, and as many of you would know, this is a region that's growing and it's growing fast. Places like Camden, Campbelltown, Wollondilly, Liverpool, Bankstown have all experienced massive population bursts over the past 20 years, and by 2041 can expect significantly more. In real numbers, we're talking about an additional 400,000 residents calling the southwest home in the next 17 years. And while population forecasts are never an exact science, the numbers which equate to Campbelltown Stadium being filled 20 times over are too significant to put the chance. It's something that's not lost on the state government either, which in its release of local housing targets recently recognised the need to increase supply in these areas. A quick look at the current targets in these various areas of the southwest shows that this is a part of Sydney that will be required to do its fair share of lifting. While we've been encouraged by the state government's insistence on councils, particularly in the east and the north, that have the existing infrastructure and connections in place to also do its part, there's no denying that Greater Western Sydney and South Western Sydney will have a critical role to play. Campbelltown, Fairfield, Liverpool, Wollondilly are all expected to see massive jumps in housing numbers over the next 5 years. Importantly, these areas, led by council staff and elected officials like Mayor Grace, haven't backed away from the challenge. Indeed, many of them have embraced it. Councils in the region, and no, they're not all perfect, but what they have shown for a while now is a willingness to work with proponents, engage effectively with their communities, advocate on behalf of residents and work harder, smarter and more efficiently. While the recently released DA approval league table, which I know it's had its critics and a bit of contention, but and it's not the only benchmarking tool to assess the effectiveness of councils. But what we're seeing is a lot of Southwest Sydney councils at the top of that table, including Wollondilly, which came in at number one. This does say that this part of Greater Sydney does get it. But for all of the metrics, the policies and ambition to deliver on these targets, the one constant that will ultimately determine the success of our future development is whether these homes, our future communities, has the necessary infrastructure in place to connect them to the jobs, services and amenity that they're going to need. The dialogue's position has always been that there is a place and a need for a variety of different homes to support a range of different needs and lifestyles. It's especially true for greenfield development, and while we applaud the government's focus on increasing density in the central and eastern parts of Sydney, supported by existing infrastructure, we also feel that with the right planning, design and consideration, that good development in the southwest is also doable. Getting the right building blocks in place is critical. The enabling infrastructure, the back of house, it may not generate the sexiest of headlines or provide the best photo opportunity, But without the pipes, the power, the access roads, without this stuff, it just doesn't work. It's also not cheap, especially at a time when governments at all levels are tasked with the challenge of balancing their books. And it's made even more challenging given the constrained workforce and supply chain issues we're experiencing. But just because something is difficult or expensive doesn't mean we just walk away. And while it's government's jobs to pick winners and make sure taxpayers' dollars are spent sensibly, it's also the role of the private sector to come up with the solutions on how it can support government's objectives and respond to these challenges. And we're seeing that play out. And today we'll hear about how developers, landowners, energy companies, utility providers are thinking outside the box to respond to some of these challenges. We'll hear about Walker's new development in Appin and its partnership with Sydney Water, which is designed to speed up delivery of new infrastructure. We'll hear about Zen Energy's plans at Camden, which could provide a sustainable energy solution to power up to 500,000 homes in the southwest. Critically, we'll also hear from our leading tertiary and skills providers, WSU and TAFE New South Wales, about the work they're doing to ensure we have the knowledge and the know-how to support future industries. Today's discussion is deliberately convened with an eye towards the next 20 to 30 years of development in Greater Sydney, recognising the important role that South West will play over that period. But that's not to say there's not already a lot of funding and building that's taking place, particularly on the infrastructure front. In last month's state budget, around $16 billion worth of infrastructure projects were included. Things like hospital upgrades, redevelopments at Bankstown and Fairfield, 31 new preschools, 10 high school upgrades, 3 brand new high schools, 12 major road projects, Elizabeth Drive connecting to the Aerotropolis, 9 new metro stations, and of course more than $1 billion to continue to build the new Bradfield City Centre adjacent to the airport. $16 billion, which is going to significantly shape the growth of the southwest over the next decade, particularly once the airport and the new metro lines open at the end of 2026. But while that's happening, and what I hope today's event helps to spark, is about what happens and what's needed over the coming decades. Some of you may have heard us recently talk about the importance of reviving the Melbourne-Dumbarton rail link to better connect the southwest and Illawarra via a dual passenger and freight line, an opportunity to connect the state's global gateways, Port Kembla, Moorebank Intermodal, and the Western Sydney Aerotropolis, which will open up a range of new industry opportunities, while also ensuring new communities in places like Wilton, Appin, and down south have access to employment centres in Sydney. We'd like to see both the federal and state governments jointly fund a business case, which includes electrification of the Southern Line from Picton to Macarthur, so we can get this project, which started in the 80s, completed. And when it comes to city shaping projects and connecting residents to jobs, few projects are as impactful as the Sydney Metro. Our view is that the next logical step in the metro network is in the southwest, linking the airport to Macarthur. As it stands, residents in these areas currently have a clearer run to Kingsford Smith International at Mascot than they do getting to their own airport at Badgerys Creek. This needs to be addressed, and the families of the southwest need to have better access to the jobs and the opportunities that Western Sydney International and the Aerotropolis are set to provide. Just as important as moving people is moving freight, and the Outer Sydney Orbital, which is expected to deliver significant productivity and economic development opportunities, is another project that we think has some significant long-term impacts and one that we'd like to see advanced and prioritised. In the short and the medium term, we're pleased that the New South Wales Government is examining bus solutions, particularly in areas that have limited access to key employment centres, and we continue to look towards both the federal and state governments to deliver on its Western Sydney City Deal promise of rapid, fast buses to the airport. But the one thing that South West is not short of, and we heard it earlier from the Mayor, and I'm sure we'll be hearing it from many others today, is passion. It's a passion that stems from wanting the best outcomes for residents, workers and visitors in the region, and a passion that recognises the rapid growth and the needs of its future communities. The South West, led by its councils and MPs, have been active in building a case for investment, understanding that there are strong waves of change on the horizon, and in many cases, that change has already started to flow through into their communities. And while there is an urgency, there's no denying that when it comes to servicing these areas, that there are some challenges, and we recognise that it won't be able to happen all at once. But like we'll hear today, and like what we've seen play out over the past 12 months, we can be reassured by the fact that there is a state government that has shown that it is committed to establishing clearer processes, providing greater transparency and certainty, that it is prepared to innovate and reduce red tape, and has the decision makers in place that are willing to have the sometimes difficult but necessary discussions. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attendance today, and for what I'm sure will be a valued contribution to the conversation.